Clarity by Dragon's Chapter 5 again. Hold on! Ruby ordered as she slung the man's arm around her and hauling his larger frame upon her shoulders, without giving him a chance to consent, without giving herself a chance to think about what she was doing. She activated her semblance and she shot off to put some distance between herself and the assassins. She was not going to let a repeat of the forest happen here. She knew they were already behind her, darting from roof to roof like some dog to fleas trying to catch up and sink its teeth into them. Without looking back, she had no idea how many of them there were, or who they were, or why they wanted to kill this man. She only knew one. She remembered him. How could she ever forget? Clarity. He remembered her. Not that he would forget anyway. It was the girl from the forest. The semblance had been a dead giveaway. A speed semblance of all things. It was the worst possible thing for them right now. The whole thing was against all probability. It would be difficult for Iroh and Namekuji to keep up with. They ended up chasing her from street level. "Stick to the rooftops," the blonde ordered even as his booted foot propelled him off a tottering brick edge with nary a sound. Her semblance gives her an advantage in a straight run, but we should be able to outmaneuver her. "What do you want us to do?" the raven-masked teen asked as he ran next to him, not looking at the target or his feet, but the emotionless countenance of his captain. "Take advantage of the chaos," Naruto responded, himself not eschewing sight of the red weaving in and out of fleeing pedestrians far below. "Force them into the alleys as planned. They will give her less room to maneuver." But we don't know the extent of her speed," Namekuji countered through the comms. "How do we know she won't just plow through us if given a chance to go all out? As it is, she seems to be slowing down to avoid civilians." "She won't escape," Naruto declared with a finality. The darkness in his statement was ironically the most emotion they'd heard from their leader, and made the lot question whether they desired to try and coax out more. "They are already nearing the harbor. That will severely limit her options. From there we will force her choices." Returning to business, he laid out his plan to the team to finish the mission. "Is that understood?" Naruto asked, leaping onto another roof, which gave him a bird's eye view of the entire district. "Yes, loud and clear." "Hm, good." Naruto nodded to the stalwart chorus. "What should we do if she should resist?" Taka dared ask, being the only one who probably could. Naruto didn't respond to him immediately, and so he pressed an answer. "She's still a civilian, as far as we know. We'll deal with her accordingly when the time comes." The Black Mask gave nothing as to what this meant, though they all expected that. Their captain, their friend, didn't feel anything. Not anymore. Clarity. Ruby pushed through the crowd at a mild clip of her semblance. She would be going faster, but there were too many people in the way. It didn't help that the man wasn't doing much to make her rescue either, as he clutched to her like a cat afraid of the water. Then again, she'd probably be panicked too if people were attempting to kill her. She weaved through the chaotic streets as best she could with the bumbling man, feeling like she was participating in the most high-stakes game of egg race in her life. The goal was to get him to police station, which should be somewhere around here, if memory served. She was gambling on the fact the assassins wouldn't be brazen enough to attack a police station in broad daylight. From there she could call for huntsmen and huntresses, and hopefully they would be able to protect the man from whatever additional threat was backing up her fox masked pursuer. At least that's what she was hoping for. Thankfully, despite the slow pace, the assassins were keeping their distance. "They don't want to be seen," Ruby deduced, taking confidence in this for her plan. They probably hadn't wanted to in the forest either. but there had most likely been forced. That's what Ruby thought anyway, though if she had really thought about it, she had been the one to force it back then too. Maybe she could use the chaos to her advantage. The police station was only a few blocks away. All she had to do was get out of the pandemonium that was the plaza and she could get loose. The odds were in her favor this time around. There was no way for the pursuers to get close to them, and there were too many people in the way to get a clear shot with the White Fang's interference still causing pandemonium. She already knew from previous experience that they couldn't keep up with her semblance. I can do this, Ruby thought confidently. That all changed when the full-grown lion leapt in front of her. What the heck? She yelled in shock, planting her feet into the ground and stopping just in time to avoid crashing into a mother and child who had been running in the opposite direction before the lion showed up. The beast's sudden appearance sent the people into an even larger panic. People dealing with assassins and terrorists wasn't enough, apparently. Roaring and snapping in anger at someone who approached it, yet what seemed weird to Ruby was how the exotic predator never really tried to pursue anyone, and now that she thought about it, the lion looked strange, almost like it wasn't real. But she didn't have time to really think about it. She could feel his eyes on her back, burning like a candle wick. Not giving the non sequitur another thought, she turned on the melted heel of her boot and bolted off in the other direction, blitzing through the streets as fast as she could, while in her head she was calculating another route to take the man. Not done yet, she whispered to herself with a wry smirk. Now she moved through the streets as fast as her legs could take them both, relying on her reflexes to avoid running into any more people or escape the zoo creatures. I'm sorry. At last, calming down enough to speak, the man's voice was barely above her own whisper as it contended against the rushing wind. "You have nothing to be sorry for," she stated, adrenaline and more urgent matters blocking the girl's usual inhibition when talking to strangers. "But you shouldn't be involved in this," he stated with concern, the ghost of authority in his voice unable to catch up. "They might kill you too." "Don't worry about it," Ruby said. "It's what I do." There was a grin inflection to this assurance despite the smile she cast back at the man. She had gone silent once again, and Ruby didn't feel the need to urge him to resume talking. But she could feel his weight lift off her slightly. He was running with her now, trying anyway. That would make things easier. "I'll get you to the police station. You should be safe there," Ruby told him. The man didn't say anything, but she could still hear his footstep, indicating he was still with her. They were so close now, just a few more yards and they would have room to breathe. Then she could really use her semblance and get the man to her destination. The goal was in sight. Of course, it wasn't going to be that easy. "Hail to the White Fang! We will be heard!" It seemed that the White Fang decided to occupy her escape route. She couldn't distinguish them from other bodies, but what she could hear was enough justification for her next action. Without hesitation, she switched directions once again. She grabbed the man's hand and up yanked him down another route that was only slightly out of their way. She pushed through the crowd, so same as before, as Ruby continued mentally rewriting a new path. But it seemed that life was not on her side today at all. The sunny day darkened quickly as Ruby felt a shadow over her head and saw a large statue falling towards them. "Look out!" Ruby shouted as she threw herself and the man into a nearby alley just as the statue hit the ground. This only seemed to increase the panic as the crack resounded all up and down the grid-like streets. Marble shards shooting off in every direction like a grass cutter bomb. Ruby could only hope that all of this was limited to the plaza and surrounding area, because if this was happening all across the city, She shuddered at the thought of the amount of grim that would swarm the place. But first things first, she had a different adversary to deal with. "We have to go," the red-hooded girl argued as she and the man pressed deeper into the narrow passage. She didn't want to use back alleys, but with all the calamity going on out in the streets, it seemed she didn't have any choice. That thought caused her to pause. The strange line, the gunshots, but no White Fang in sight. Then the statue. "It's a trap," she whispered, realizing this at the same moment she realized that they were no longer alone in that alley. Clarity. Shadowy gargoyles loomed over them from the roofs and post sentient on the entrance and exits of the alleyways like Sishi. The target and the annoying obstacle were surrounded from four sides by Kitsune and his team, who congealed from the shadows and stony facade of the buildings. In contrast to everything that had gone wrong previously, it had been almost too easy to move their target where they wanted. All that was left to do was to make the kill, and the mission would be complete, their honor redeemed. The leering figure came alive and crept towards the huddled man and teen, dropping down from the eaves and slinking from either entrance of the alley in a silence that set them apart from the pandemonium echoing overhead. "Enough time has been wasted," the young leader thought, wearing the darkness like a mantle of authority of life and death. "I'll end this now." He pulled his ninjato out and moved forward. A stab through the temple and it would be done. He edged closer, but before he could consummate the deed, he found his eyes covered by a red blur. He felt more than saw the swing of a familiar weapon and was forced to jump back, preventing him from making the finishing blow. Looking up from his defensive crouch at the girl surrounded in a flurry of rose petals, she met his stare dead in the eyes. Her next words were deafening in the cacophony that was still going on around them. "Not again." Clarity. Ruby held the crescent rose between them as she stared down the black-masked assassin, crouched against the dank ground, with his sword flickering low like a tail in anticipation of her next move. Her eyes darted around, recognizing that this was the exact same group of assassins that she had encountered in the forest. They might have had been cut from the same cloth, but there were differences to their uniforms enough to set them apart in her mind. While three, including Kitsune, wielded ninjato, one held a full sword which you could now see as a tachi rather than katana, as the straight edge lined parallel with the alley's brickwork. In addition to their unique masks, the rest of their heads were swaddled in hoods instead of the inky shadows like she'd first assumed, but it was still easy enough to distinguish them even without those calling cards. Ruby reckoned she'd be able to pick them out of a crowd simply by the feeling they gave off, the way they moved like hyenas hungry for their supper. "Not again," she repeated more to herself than to the murderer. "Not again, little girl," the man whispered with grim resignation, using her as support one last time so that he could stand. Thank you for your help, but you should get out of here. You don't want to see what comes next." "It's too late for that," Ruby whispered back with the same morbid acceptance as the marked man. "I'm a huntress in training," and she reinforced, drawing pride and righteousness with the title. The mask nodded almost approvingly, and the two of the assassins moved. So did Ruby. She swung her scythe in a 360-degree arc, forcing a flanking assassin back. The moment she stopped, she pulled the trigger, blasting her towards the one who hadn't moved. Not expecting the girl to come at them offensively, they just barely dodged her hastily planned tackle. But Ruby wasn't done, swinging the large weapon around with ease and knocking the enemies aside into the air. The assassins recovered quickly before he even hit the ground. She would have to ignore him for now. She popped the three shots loosely aimed for the other assassins, indicating that she hadn't forgotten them. Taking the opportunity while they were off, the girl sped towards the man she was protecting and grabbed him, attempting to run back into the streets and out of the alley which had come a raccoon trap. She couldn't get the chance as the fist tightened and another one of the assassins moved to intercept her. The one with the long sword was the one that had begun to engage her, and the added steel allowed the Raven-masked assassin to reach farther with his strikes, all but negating their prior advantage, and much to her horror and chagrin, they proved just as fast. No, they might have even been faster in terms of attack. She pushed the man towards the ground before the surprisingly quick strike could decapitate them both, though they could see a few strands of hair flutter to the ground. Luckily for them, Yang wasn't here, but watching her hair fall was when she noticed the approaching shadow. Trying to give them room to breathe, she twisted Crescent Rose and fired it at the sword wielder. This also served to push her and the man backwards, smacking right into another assassin's chest and knocking the wind out of them. Ruby knew she wouldn't be able to keep this deadly game much longer. Yes, she and Crescent Rose shined when it came to fighting large groups, and that was probably the only reason she had been able to keep the man alive as long as she had thus far. It had even occurred to her that the assassins were trying not to harm her, but she could still tell these guys were as strong, if not stronger than she was individually. And there was the added tactical disadvantage of being in the close quarters, which negated almost all her assets. Not to mention there were four of them and only one of her. But above all that in her mind, there was one thing that was bothering her more than anything else. The one which had yet to move, his fox mask fixated and Ninjato clenched in his hand. Throughout the entire scuffle, she had felt his eyes on her, just like when she was running through the streets. It was like he was a predator and she was his prey. No, not her. The man she was protecting was the prey. She was just an obstacle blocking his path, and the thought made her mad. "I'm right here," she growled, clutching Crescent Rose tighter and baring it like an animal bares their teeth. "What are you waiting for? Come and get me!" And she watched for any hint of reaction, but the only one to be taken aback was she herself as the other assassins responded to her invitation. From under her guarded stance, an inky black dog snapped up her weapon and its maw and tried to wrench it from her grip. The hound looked like it had been practically birthed from the sludge of sewers, and her opinion was only reinforced when she managed to yank her scythe away, and the creature seemingly splattered against the alley wall like graffiti. There was no time for second opinions, as the disposable beast served its purpose, distracting her from the first careening towards her blind spot. Suddenly Ruby was the one sent flying, ragdolling against the same wall as the canine. Unfortunately, she was not nearly as pliable. Although Ruby was almost used to such blows and recovered relatively quickly because she had taken such punches from her sister, she now had a reliable metric to compare their strengths. Looking at the one who hit her, she was sure that the cap-wearing woman, she couldn't really tell with the armor mask and way in which they all swirled in her vision, was at least on par with her sister. Also, that she had pulled the last punch, and that thought made her fearful, but not about to back down, nor was Ruby going to sit idly by as the swordsman ran through. Some sixth sense She heard him coming and moved herself out of the way before she was disarmed. Again, she should have been grateful that they weren't really trying to harm her, and in her gratitude, she jabbed the half of Crescent Rose in his face and followed it up with a low swing which made him back off. All too eager to give herself distance, Ruby blasted backwards and away from the young man who could match her cut for cut, straight into a tangle of drawn lines that were not like snakes. Dispatching the scribble with almost no resistance, she almost buckled under the immense weight of another of the female's blows. "No time for this," she grunted, falling to her knees and taking a gamble by darting through the female assassin's wide stance. Aiming for the man, she batted away a strike from the assassin, who must have been invoking the animals, and in a whirlwind of movement she swept his legs out from underneath. "Come on!" grabbing the man's hand as she was all but ready to barge their way out of the alley with her semblance. Even if she ended up dislocating the man's shoulder, at least he would be alive. Accidentally or not, the downed artist had one more card to play. As Ruby slipped on the spilled ink and lost her footing, both she and the man were sent tumbling down the alley, closer to the exit but not close enough, and she quickly had to drag them both out of the path of a flurry of shuriken. Heaving them to their feet, Ruby backed up and evaded another attack from the sword user, only to receive a devastating punch to her side from out of nowhere which sent her skidding unfortunately. While she could take the pain, the hand linking her to the man was suddenly severed and she was forced apart from him. In the close quarter chaos, she at least had managed to hook the assassin that hit her and sent her flying as well. That was his chance. She saw Kitsune move just as she came to a rolling stop. Blade at the ready, she darted at the man in a burst of speed that had have been hard pressed to even if her head hadn't been swimming. No! Slinging herself with Crescent Rose, she skidded to a halt in front of the man. Between him and death, he was too close. She was out of bullets. Hardly expect a prolonged battle on her day off, and her aura was low, which meant she couldn't use her semblance to get both away. There was nothing she could do. She had failed. Offering everything she had left, she held her arms out wide to shield the man from the blooming strike. With the oncoming blow to close the redirect, it was all she could do. It wasn't enough. She would either perish instantly or stumble, be dismissed as easily as Weiss had done upon first meeting her. Rather than close her eyes to the inevitable, she looked up at her would-be killer, and at this distance she could make out his blue eyes even more clearly. If it were possible to get to the bottom of those empty abysses. Not again! And she proclaimed defiantly, awaiting the possible fatal blow. Get the hell away from her! Tables were turned, and Kitsune had no chance to alter his course as he felt the fist impact his mask, sending him back in a tizzy. Able to concentrate on something other than her demise, Ruby looked around and noticed that others had joined them in the alley. No, not others. Trouble seems to follow you, doesn't it? I'm pretty sure this isn't what you had in mind for a day out. I dare any of you to lay a hand on her. Her team. Her team. She couldn't help the smile that made its way on her face at this thought and the feeling of relief which came with it. Naruto stumbled from the haymaker he should have seen coming. Thankfully his mask didn't break from the powerful blow and revealed his dissatisfied scowl. Readjusting his porcelain face, he felt his team regroup next to him, as together they stared down the group of four now protecting their target. Two of them he recognized from the forest, and the other one was the Sneerus. Assessing the situation now, he took a page from an old acquaintance. Troublesome. Surrender now! Brandishing Merchanaster and barely restrained fury, Luis commanded the rather gathered assassins. I've already contacted the authorities. Another huntsman will be here soon to take you all in. She held her sword aloft and pointed at her enemies. Don't make this harder on yourselves. Taka grunted in frustration. She was bluffing. She had to be. He took a half step forward, regarding her two-stiff stance with contempt, engaging the others just as clinically they could win. But could they risk that? Please don't surrender, the blonde brawler seethed as she punched her fists together, sparking an explosion in that confined space. Please give me a reason, she growled, her eyes repeatedly shifting from lilac to red as she dragged them over the opposite team. Taisho, what do we do? Namekuji asked, bringing her fist up as she was clearly prepared for a fight. Saying nothing, Aro held his ninjato in a reverse grip while Taka took on ox stance with his katana, challenging the white-haired Harris. All their captain's orders they would all re-engage, rush to their deaths, while all the surety and celerity of a guillotine. In the moment before it dropped, Kitsun examined the situation. In terms of numbers, they were now on equal ground, and more huntsmen were heading their way to shift the balance further away from their advantage. There was only one solution. His eyes rose back to meet hers once again. The defiance in her stare hadn't left even now, showing no change from what she was, all by herself against the four of them. It was clear she would fight them no matter what. Retreat. The order came low and severely, and the team almost couldn't believe their ears. They hesitated for a moment, but one by one they nodded. "You're not going anywhere!" Yang roared as she leapt at them with cocked fist. Before Ruby could dissuade her sister, Namekuji stepped forward to meet her fist with one of her own. What followed was a shock wave that expanded to fill the alley and pushed the huntress back, having not expected the counterattack nor the extreme reaction. This was especially so for Yang, who had only ever seen her father and uncle meet an attack with her semblance head-on, and even they were forced back, if even a little. This one hadn't even budged, filled with equal parts anxiousness and excitement at the thought of an equal. Yang looked ready to continue, but before she could rearm another attack, her vision was blurred by smoke. "No, you don't," Wisa asserted to herself, scowling after recovering from her shockwave. Revolving Myrtonaster's chamber, she imbued gale dust into her rapier and sent a slash forward to dissipate the smoke screen, but by the time it cleared, the four assassins were already gone.